Right then, where were we? Space people. Yes. Right. Well, as I was saying in the previous section, we've been going up to space for 100 years or so, I guess. And as I said, also, see, since we started the Industrial Revolution, I'm quite certain we were the first in space, the British people, and so I went on the internet and I typed in space people or whatever, and surprised to find that in spite of the huge list of British people who must have been up there by now, I could only find two, but I guess I just typed in something wrong. Maybe just the latest two came up. I don't know. There are two people whose name I can't remember. One with them, Kevin Peake or Tim Peake or something like that, and the other, he was just a regular astronaut, and the other one was a woman, and I was surprised to find apparently she's the first woman in space, and I shudder to think what's been going on up in space stations up to now. There's one or two or three or four or five or six or seven or eight space stations up there at the moment, and it seems to me that there've been no women up there at all, which having been a woman myself, I don't see any reason why women can't go up to space, and not least because if you just imagine the space station that I was looking at on the internet was one that had been occupied by all sorts of people from all sorts of countries, including, worst of all, I expect, is those dirty bastard cosmonaut Russian men, which, as you can imagine, wouldn't have done a thing up there. There would be piles of washing up, and there would be absolutely no housework done at all. So, quite cleverly, rather late in the day, I expect, they decided to send this woman, Helen Sharman, up there. Yeah, so she went up in a. It wasn't like in the old days. We've been up there, as I said, since the 1890s, I guess. She went up there in the 1990s, so they didn't use the old steam power rockets anymore. Rockets go up by rocket power now, and she went up there, and she would have brought her duster and her mop and things like that. And when I was researching this and thinking about this, I thought to myself, don't be demoralised. I'd said in the previous section that I decided to just put comedy to one side with regards to trying to present the subject of figurative stone sculpture to you. But then I found that, actually, I could probably save the day, actually, because it occurred to me that Helen Sharman was going up to space to dig out that space station. And she's also a scientist, apparently, so she would have probably done some science up there. But ostensibly, anyway, she is up there to dig out that space station, get it spick and span again. And amongst the things she would have been asked to bring up there was, well, this is what made me laugh, and it'll have you in stitches behind the camera there. The space station, as you can imagine, is up in space, and up there it's a vacuum. Can you imagine? And the whole point of the structure of the space station is to exclude the vacuum from the interior of the space station. And there's Helen Sharman going up there, and what is she bringing with her? Yes, you've guessed it, a vacuum. Made me hoot with laughter. And 100 years been up there. They've managed to keep the vacuum out. Bring a woman up. First thing she does is bring a vacuum into the space station, which is, the whole thing is to keep the vacuum out. So I just thought, very funny. She's brought a vacuum cleaner up there, and anyway, being a woman, I imagine she would have wanted to bring a few things up there that the gentlemen, including those, as I say, those dirty bastard Russians that have been up there, they wouldn't have brought up there with them. She would have seen the photographs and probably some video footage of what it's like in the space station. She would have noticed quite straight away. I mean, I noticed it straight away. It's a very blokey atmosphere in there. There's wires and cables and And again, talking about cables and things like that, I just thought, oh, here we go. It's like a message from God. This is. It's kind of like in the previous section I mentioned about me tripping over the cable. I didn't think it's very funny, but I could see that people like Micky Flanagan would be able to develop a sense of, an aura of mirth around that thing of falling over the cable. And if it was a vacuum cable as well, the whole concept of bringing the vacuum into the space station and tripping over the vacuum cable, I dare say the likes of Micky Flanagan, and I will contact him and ask him, if he can develop this into some, half an hour of comedy, have people in the street shouting instead of I'm out, they could be going on, oh look, I've just tripped over, they could be in town tripping over cables and pretending to vacuum and things like that. Anyway, I digress. So she asked if she could bring up, I'm probably jumping the gun here. I was watching this on YouTube, and it was she was being interviewed in front of a studio audience, and they were asking her about her missions and her trips into space, and she was talking about them, and the audience were, well, I think they were looking around. They weren't particularly interested because she was talking about science, but they then became interested because they started talking about. Helen started talking about the, well, she didn't talk about it, but I'm guessing this is where it came from because I was thoroughly bored, and then I suddenly pricked up my ears. She would have asked if she could bring up flowers and pot plants and the like, and she would have been refused. I've never seen anything of the sort up there then or since, and but Helen, being Helen, she was a clever girl. She said, oh, well, you may say, no, I can't bring flowers and pot plants up there, but I'm going to have flowers and pot plants up there. So, clever girl, she clearly, what she did was stuffed her cleavage and her knickers full of garden seeds, and up she went in one of the new rocket-powered rockets, and lo and behold, she was planting these seeds up in space. And suddenly, the audience, I noticed, and myself included, was thinking, "Oh my goodness, what are you doing there, Helen? That sounds interesting." And she noticed, amazingly, she found that these seeds grew. How they grow in space, I don't know, but it's inside the space station, so I suppose they've got everything they need. Perhaps they've got water and they've got light. And but what she noticed, and would have been very disappointed, having spent the time digging out that space station and tidying it up, she noticed that lo and behold, she's brought order to the space station, but these bloody roots of the plants were going all over the place. And because on Earth they don't, as you know from your school lessons, back at school, that Mr. Farmer, he plants the seeds in the fields, and the wheat grows up towards the sun, and the roots, they go down towards. They're burrowing down towards the Earth's core, because that's where all the water is, in the Earth's core, and so the roots all go down. But of course, in space, they haven't got a fucking clue where they are and where to send the roots out. So they're sending the roots out hither, thither, all over the place, and trying to seek out the Earth's core, hopelessly, of course, because there's no way they can get there. So this upset Helen, and I dare say, just like I was with the comedy, thinking, I'm going to have to spin that idea. And she was presumably about to, stick all these plants in the waste chute. I think they have a thing you pull out, you shove the stuff in quickly, shut it up. Shove the waste in, shut it up quickly, out it goes into space. Because you must have heard there's tons, millions of tons of space rubbish, space debris, space trash, I think they call it, in space. And I guess that's from the Russians particularly, I expect, making a lot of rubbish and throwing it out to space. So anyway, but she noticed, like any woman, when they're in the kitchen, they like to have a glass of wine and have some music on while they're cooking, and she had placed her boogie box next to the plants, and she noticed when she did this, all the roots go in one direction. I think they go either went to the boogie box or possibly away, but whichever way they all went together. And luckily, as I mentioned before, Helen Sharman, as well as being a space station cleaner, she's also a scientist. So she deduced goodness knows how, but she deduced, she's a scientist, so she knows these things, that it's the electromagnetic field that caused the roots to go towards or away from the boogie box. And so I guess, you know, that project was saved, and she was able, and you know, I must actually go on the internet and have a look, see if space stations now are festooned with floral arrangements and you know, general botanical beautification. I don't know. I'm sure it is. Anyway, Helen therefore can lay claim to A, having been the first person to have brought order to a space station, secondly to have grown plants, and thirdly to have worked out that, you know, if you put you know, the pots up there, fill them with earth and a bit of water, but stick a magnet underneath them or something like that, then they'll grow properly. So anyway, so that's Helen Sharman's thing. But I noticed that we were all looking forward to that and looked very interested. But afterwards I thought to myself, that was very interesting. Sure, I will talk about that as I'm talking about it to you now, but I'm not going to just generally laugh about that, or it doesn't make me feel fantastic. I don't really care, frankly, what goes on in the space station. So I was thinking, Helen, you're a lovely lady. You're very clever, and the space station's never looked so good since you've been up there. And I think to myself, but that's not really what I'm after from a presentation. You know, her presentation was very much like my presentations to all these middle class groups that I mentioned before. You know, the Probus groups and the Upper Basildon Wives Club groups and the like. And they're all very good. They're all very interested, but I haven't made them go away because it's all very polite, and you can't swear and you can't tell them what's what. So Helen Sharman was doing the same to that audience. They were all a bit bored, really, and they went away saying, very interesting, and who we're going to have next month, you know. And so I thought, okay, she's in a situation like I am. She's a clever girl. She's done a year's training or so, probably, and you know, also to become a university person and an astronaut. So, you know, put it together, she's probably done 2 years training, and you know, and I've done obviously 10 years training so far. You know, so I was just thinking to myself, you know, when I examine what I do, I can't find the humour in it to bring to you, and that's because, you know, you can't really see the faults or you can't really work it out when you're looking at yourself. But after looking at her, so I was thinking to myself, right, what I'm going to do is imagine Helen Sharman trying to, you know, in her situation, trying to develop her act and make it more mirthful, let's say, for you. So in the next section, what we're going to do, you know, I'm going to go away now, have another, fucking hell, it's empty again. Anyway, I'm going to go away in a minute. When I come back, I'm going to imagine that Helen Sharman's over there doing her work, and I'm over there doing my work, and I'm going to be looking at hers and seeing what it is she does and how she could make that humorous, and how she can bring comedy into what she does to make you, the common man and the woman in the street, you know, the ordinary person with their miserable lives, really enjoy the presentation. And then I'm going to be over here doing the same thing. So you can imagine we're both here. If I can get Helen Sharman over here, I will. But I don't think so, because I'm going to just fill up the glass. I don't think she can get here in time for that. So we'll just imagine she's here, and then and we'll go from there. Are you with me so far? Right, great stuff. Let me just turn you off, and we'll be back in a few minutes.